Hi, everybody. I prepared a list of questions. Just in case we ran out of things to talk about, I would have them here. But the first one I've been wanting to ask David for a long time, and that is, how has Washington changed since Trump came into office, and more particularly since he took over the Kennedy Center?
Well, thank you, Karen. It's such a pleasure to be on the stage with you and with so many friends and neighbors. Thank you all for your support for the hospital. What a tremendous difference you are making tonight. I'll illustrate the difference with a little anecdote. When our two elder children were little, they attended a pre-K program where one grade, one section started the day at 8:30 and the next at 9. And so you would drop off the children, you would drop off the elder child at 8:30, and there was half an hour to wait until the second one went into the class at 9. So I would idle in the playground. One of the other people, this was in the late 1990s, one of the other people in the same situation was a man named Michael Waldman, who was the chief speechwriter to President Clinton. And so we would, he didn't drop the kids off every day, but he did it most of the time. And so we would spend half an hour together in the playground talking about our children. But I would ask him what's going on, and he would tell me. And a lot of the life of the city, a lot of that sense of, people think insiderness is handled like in Frank Underwood's sinister drawing rooms and all the things you've seen on TV. A lot of it happens like that. It's two dads who have half an hour to fill between one drop-off and another, saying, so what's going on and what do you say? And he would ask me questions. We didn't agree on many things, but we agreed on some. But we were neighbors. That kind of informal communication is the life of any capital city, and especially Washington, because it's small. It's not London, it's not Paris, it's not New York. It is a lot more in many ways like Picton than it is like Toronto. And that kind of connection, that's gone. That is completely gone. These are now two angry tribes, each of which believes the worst things about the other. And it is inconceivable to me that if I were in that situation with one of the Trump speechwriters, that they or I would want to talk to the other.
And is there that ease of driving to school and dropping your kids off?
Well, Washington is, compared to New York, an easier place to live. People do drive. You can park. They go to the store. They park in parking lots. So it is more like a normal American city than New York is. So it's an easier place to live. But it's geographically distributed. Look, during the first Trump presidency, the place where the Trump people hung out, their clubhouse, was the foyer, or the bar in the Trump Hotel, and which was a place where they went and other people did not. And then Trump left office the first time after some violence, and the hotel was sold, it changed ownership, and then suddenly it became a place where other people went, and the Trump people stopped going. So there are these kinds of zones of connection, and for better or for worse, things like the White House Correspondents' Dinner, which was an event where the press those events are sort of breaking down. They don't happen anymore. And that's kind of a loss, but it's also kind of in the nature of things, because you've got some quite existential divides. President Trump, just the other day, accused President Obama of treason. Now, this is a double whammy, because treason, of course, is potentially punishable by death. It's also true that in order to protect Trump, his friendly Supreme Court has said presidents can't be punished for anything. So that would include treason, I presume. But it gives you look, if one president is asking that one of his predecessors be killed, it makes it a little difficult to break bread together.
As Jane Austen never tired of observing, life is about the very, very small things.
Yeah. Well, life is. And here's how it's different. Just as an example, it's not always like this. So you mentioned I worked for President W. Bush. So the W. Bush presidency the last few months were attended by this tremendous financial catastrophe. The stock market crash, and that begins in the spring of 2008, and sort of the first wave of the heart attack is in April or May, I forget exactly, and the second heart attack hits hard in October, and the economy then is in free fall from October of 2008 to January of 2009, the inauguration of the new president. Now, everybody remembered that a similar catastrophe timing had happened in 1932-33 with the handover from President Herbert Hoover to Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Those two men hated each other. There was no communication. And that was, of course, in those days, the president took office in March, not in January. And the non-communication between the two was an exacerbating factor in driving the economy to rock bottom in the spring of 1933. And so knowing that history, the Bush and Obama people had to figure out how to deal with it. And they did a transition. There's a graduate thesis written about it that's now been published as the best transition probably in American history. Because the Bush people called in the Obama people and said, every meeting we have, we want you to be there so you can see what we're doing. You can't talk because there's only one president at a time. So those chairs around the wall, those are for you. The chairs around the table are for us, but you can see. So when later, if we have if the people from Chase Manhattan or General Motors come to you and say, the last administration promised us this or that, you think, well, I was there against the wall. No, they didn't. And at the same time that the Obama people said we're committed, people are going to be asking us for our opinion all the time. Well, we're not the administration yet. So we have nothing to say until noon on January 20th of 2009. Until then, and you've seen this strange rapport that exists between President W. Bush and Michelle Obama, and a lot of that was forged in those days of understanding different views, different parties, but there's a transition, there's a catastrophe, and there has to be communication. And although the catastrophe left us with a bad recession, it didn't turn into 1933. It was not a global depression. There was recovery. And that was in part because of those patterns of cooperation and communication that were forged in those months. And that's the way it can be. That's not the way it is today.
Yeah, that brings us to the missing sense of shared enterprise.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to ask you, I wanted to start with our new Prime Minister and the monumental task he is facing. There's no sense of shared enterprise between Canada and the U.S. anymore in some quarters. I don't think that this is across Canada or the U.S., but clearly the driver of policy now does not work with an idea of shared enterprise.
Yeah.
So when our new PM first took office in May, the first thing he did was visit Britain and France.
Yeah.
And it was a pretty assertive and symbolic gesture about Canada's history, sovereignty, place in the world, role, its meaning as a nation. And it was also a kind of opening gamble in his fulfilling of his campaign promise, which was to take Canada away from the United States for both trade and security. So I want to ask you about that, but before we get there, at the time, when Carney went to Britain and France first, you said he should have gone to Mexico.
Yes. And
I want you to tell us why.
Okay. Well, there's a lot of matter in that question, so let's...
Yeah.
I may not deal with it in exactly the order that you would wish, but
I'll take off points, but okay.
You're a tough grader. So, first, what is happening in Canada and the United States is very unusual. This is a government-to-government dispute that in no way arises, in any way, from a people-to-people dispute. I don't think you will find much any ill will in the United States toward Canada. I don't think there's a lot of ill will in Canada toward Americans as such. I hope if Americans are visiting the county as tourists that they're given a warm welcome. I'm confident that that's the case. Because everything's the abiding puzzle of this conflict is how stupid and pointless and unnecessary and about nothing it is. Canada and the United States will have many frictions that are often driven by rational reasons. In this case, when the president says, my goal is that Canada be abolished and become a 51st state, it reminds me of that scene, I think it's in the movie Goldfinger, where James Bond says to Goldfinger, are you expecting me to talk? And Goldfinger replies, no, Mr. Bond, I'm expecting you to die. So a little hard to negotiate. We'll negotiate on questions. So that's where we are. So Carney's decision was driven. I think one of the things I was struck by is that Carney, as a politician and now as prime minister, is a very much more tradition-minded person than I expected. His elaboration of the role of the monarchy, inviting King Charles himself to open Parliament. I forget when the last time that happened, but it was a while ago. Britain and France, saying that those are the places we come from. That's, again, a very traditional view of Canadian history. And I think that reflects his traditionalism. I also think it's tremendously unrealistic as both economics and strategy. And Canada, geography is overwhelmingly powerful. And Canada is a North American nation. The relationship with the United States has to be managed. It will be managed in new ways. And Canada, it's easy to go talk to Britain and France, but one reason it's easy is because there's actually not a lot they can do for you, not a lot Canada can do for them, whereas although the relationship with Mexico is very difficult, and it's going in many of the same directions. They're in that department, and they are also on the receiving end of this tremendous act of bad faith, which is Trump imposing these tariffs with no regard to the treaty that he himself signed the update of in his first term in office. So I thought that Mexico is your partner, whether you will it or no, because geography is stronger than anything, even tradition.
I have heard you say that there can be no divorce.
Yeah.
We share a border.
Yeah.
What about this week? Carney has been signaling that there is not going to be a trade deal with the United States. Not only are they not going to meet an August 1st deadline, but there isn't going to be a deal.
I think this is exactly correct. And one of the impulses that Prime Minister Carney had when he came into office was that he was going to get something done fast. And I think this determination to move fast came from two places. The first is Canada suffering real, meaningful harm. And I'm sure most of the people in the room, if not everyone, is feeling that harm. And again, it's not harm related to any necessary or objective cause. So, of course, you want it over as rapidly as possible. And he's been campaigning across the country. He's heard distress. So he heard people say, we want you to do something about it, so he wants to do it. And second, Carney is a highly intelligent and capable person. And highly intelligent and capable people have often trouble, even with all the experience he's had, of accepting how much stupidity there is in the world. But it's a fault, it's a problem, because there is that much stupidity, and you have to work around it. And so he's just thinking, if I apply enough willpower and brain power to this problem, I can resolve the problem. And my advice on this question has been, just as my advice was go to Mexico City first, was on this business, Canada needs, unfortunately and painfully, to go slowly. Because although Canada is suffering more than the United States, and although America's capacity to inflict pain is much greater than Canada's is, it's also that Trump has no permission for this from the American people. So the American ability to bear pain is much less. Whereas the Canadians have given their government permission to say, look, we know you didn't start this. We are suffering. We know it's not your fault. We know it's not really under your control. And because national independence is what's at stake, for Trump it's the right to be a jerk, but for Canada it's national independence. We'll bear things. And so because he has more permission, even though the pain is greater, he has more time. And my suggestion is use the time. That every new president, the analogy I use is the president starts with a bucket of minutes. And every day he's spending minutes from his bucket. And he has to think very carefully, or she someday, how the president will spend those minutes. And Trump is spending the minutes foolishly. And the stock is diminished. He's still got quite a few before he faces the midterms in November of 26, but there are fewer minutes now than there were in January. He spent a lot of them, and he hasn't got a lot to show for it. So make him spend down his minutes, understanding that as he gets closer to the bottom of the bucket, his position gets weaker, and Canada will be in a better position in 26 than it is in 25, even though there will be a lot of pain along the way. And that's the time to start talking, because you will begin to see there's a new poll today. Trump's numbers are now in the 30s again. These tariffs are unwanted. They don't respond to anything real. He had no men. He campaigned on them. No one believed he would do them, and he's doing them. He didn't lie about that. But he doesn't have permission, and he's acting without it, and it will be costly.
Okay, I hope you're right, and I hope that time is on our side. But can we entertain for a moment that maybe it's not?
Of course.
Yeah.
Yes.
So let's think about what Carney calls, this is not a great situation, it's Plan B.
Yeah.
We're all pursuing Plan B, and he doesn't mean just Canada. He means the UK, France, NATO, Trans-Pacific partners. Everyone is having to deal. This is a global problem.
Yeah.
So what if, while he's biding his time, Carney, for example, Carney called Trump a transformational president, and he was criticized for that. But I think part of it was saying this is a transformational moment for Canada. Trump's aggressive stance toward Greenland, which is exactly double the population of Prince Edward County, by the way. 57,000 people live in Greenland. So it really brought it home for me. When Trump started making aggressive stances toward Greenland, at the same time as he started calling Canada the 51st state, it galvanized Canada to a sense of its role in the world over the next, let's say, decade or 20 years.
Yes. Okay, so when Carney called Trump a transformational president, it reminded me of that scene in the movie Austin Powers, where Austin Powers would greet people who didn't like him by saying, "There," giving them a big smile, pointing and saying, "There you are." And that's not really a compliment. It may, like if you say it with a big enough smile, it may be experienced as a compliment. I think that's Austin Powers' hope. There you are, yes, and there you are, and you're still there. Transformations can be for ill as well as for good, and that's what's going on here. So we have built this world since 1945 that profoundly rests on American leadership to make security systems work, to make trade systems work. And since 1989 and the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, the system has become even bigger. And for most people in most places, it's a highly beneficial system. But it all rests on American guarantees, an American willingness to accept certain responsibilities. If they're out, then the system doesn't work anymore, and you have you get situations like India committing a murder on Canadian soil. There's not really a lot that Canada can do about that. It used to be that the thing that Canada would have done would have been quietly to go to the Americans and ask them to adjudicate this in some way, and if they agreed that Canada was in the right, to bring pressure to bear on India in some way, because Canada can't do. If the Americans are out of the picture, those things don't happen anymore. And India, they may not commit another murder on Canadian soil, but they will think, well, that sort of worked. Where else can we commit murders? And by the way, the Indians have some real grievances. Canada did turn a blind eye to Sikh terror, or Sikh fundraising for Sikh terrorism on Canadian soil. So they had a grievance, but assassination is not the way to use our words. By assassinations. So all that is gone. I mean, the Greenland piece, as crazy as it sounds, is really important.
Yeah.
Because Greenland is a territory of Denmark. Denmark is not only a European Union member, it's a NATO member. So what Trump is proposing is an act of aggression against a fellow NATO member. And the NATO treaty means that NATO members have to defend each other against aggression, but it never anticipated the aggression would come from inside the house. And if it does, what are the other NATO members supposed to do? Obviously, there's not much they can do. So NATO's over. And NATO just collapses. And in the Canadian-U.S. case, Canada and the United States have been partners in the defense of the airspace of North America since the Second World War. In the 1950s, a line of warning stations was built in the upper Arctic that was, the costs were shared between Canada and the United States to warn of Soviet human-piloted bombers heading toward America over Canada. Then in the 80s, there were missile systems placed. Trump was talking about an Iron Dome where Canada would again make its airspace available. And you think, well, not a divorce, but it's also not the marriage it used to be. So there's going to be a few more separate bank accounts. A little frost in the air.
How about an affair?
Well, that gets a little difficult because that's an interesting question. So I think it is conceivable. This is one of the reasons for this Mexican City, that the Mexicans could invite a Chinese ship to dock in a Mexican port. I just don't think it's conceivable for Canada to do that. the Canadian public wouldn't like it. They shouldn't like it. Again, Canada, it's not going to stop being a democratic country bound to other democracies, the predominant language of which is English, which is bound by certain legal systems. None of that is going to change. And so there is no relationship with China, which is also doing nefarious things on Canadian soil. Did we ever get an answer to what exactly was going on in that laboratory in Winnipeg where the Chinese scientists disappeared very abruptly a few weeks before the COVID virus erupted upon us? So there's a lot about China. They're a very uncomfortable partner. They're not a partner. I mean, we wish for a peaceful co-development with them, but that's not an option. And Europe is too far away and has its own problems.
Okay, I'll ask one last question on this. And there's no NATO without the United States. What if the other powers do what they're doing now? And I might be wrong, I'm not an expert, but this deal, maybe you could explain it. They seem to be trying to do an end run around the United States, keep the United States in NATO, up their spending.
Yeah.
Carney's made, and the other countries have made huge spending commitments.
Yeah.
They are now buying weapons for Ukraine.
Yeah.
The U.S. had to say yes to that deal to allow it to go forward. But is it possible for Canada, the UK, and the EU to act together around the U.S.?
I don't know. And we're going to find out.
Right, uncharted territory.
But on the Ukraine question, I think everybody has to try. I mean, it is worth remembering that the European Union together has an economy larger than that of the United States.
Yeah.
It's got collective action problems. There's so many governments, it's very hard for them to coordinate. But obviously, they're a much bigger economy than Russia, and it should be possible for them to finance Ukraine's war of self-defense. And Canada, of course, should play a part in that. The American role on this has been, in the past days, has been very strange because Trump has said a lot of contradictory things. He's created this bizarre deadline of what is going to happen in 50 days that hadn't already happened.
More of the same.
But yes, new ways of doing things will have to be found, but they won't be as good as the old ways. And that's the shame and tragedy of all of this. It's also unnecessary. But and the Biden promise was, the world will get past Trump. And I have this line I keep using that Biden in his inaugural speech in 2021 should have said, "We vow to the world needs to hear, we vow to you, never, never, never again will the United States ever mix tequila and Quaaludes."
But that's just the problem.
But then came November 2024, and the Americans saw the tequila bottle, saw the Quaaludes, and got out the little mortar and pestle to grind up the Quaaludes and pull them in and say, "Will this cocktail taste better the second time?" And everyone has to say, you know what? I guess tequila and Quaaludes are your new usual. And at any rate, we have to be prepared for you to be doing that. And we can't dismiss Trump as an aberration. He comes from somewhere. And whatever happens in this administration, there may be more to come. And everyone has to work on a new world where America is not what we looked for it to be.
Yeah, I agree. But to go back to your earlier point, that maybe we just have to wait for the pain to end. Is the Wall Street Journal trying to bring down Trump?
This is such an interesting question.
Yeah. I have dutifully asked the trade and security questions, and now
for the good stuff, right?
This is always the paid part of the podcast, I have discovered.
So I worked for the Wall Street Journal before it was under Murdoch ownership, and I remember going to the orientation session on the first or second day of work, and they had this big file of research that showed the Wall Street Journal was the single most trusted print news source in America, more trusted than the New York Times, and one of the 2 or 3 most trusted sources of information in all of the United States. And they gave you all this research, and they said, keep this in mind whenever you write anything. People believe what they read in the Wall Street Journal, so take your time and be careful. And the Journal does have a well-earned reputation for meticulous reporting. The rest of the Murdoch empire, not so much. The Murdoch empire, they paid an almost $800 million fine for lying about the voting machines and in 2020. So how is it that the Journal could have published this story about Trump when we know the rest of it? And there are a lot of theories. One of them is that, and I find this hard to believe, but I'm just going to repeat it. I heard it from someone who is thoughtful on these questions. That Murdoch inherited his business. His father created the newspaper empire back in Australia. It dates back to the First World War. And there's something in Murdoch where before he's anything, he's a newspaper man. And so he gives the Wall Street Journal, which is the most prestigious newspaper he owns, a scope in a way that he doesn't allow any of his other properties, not even the Times of London, certainly not the New York Post, never mind the TV assets. They just have scope, and he defends them. That's one theory. It seems a little sentimental, but it may well be true. It's also true, you have to think very hard about the universe of people who would have had access to that page from the book that Ghislaine Maxwell commissioned. It's not a big universe of people. And maybe it came from court records, but maybe one of them is somebody who has some relationship to Murdoch, and there's some other game that's going on. So I won't try to read motives here. The thing that is most strange about the Epstein story is it's one of the stories where almost every detail of it was already known, and known for a long time. And people have suddenly decided to start caring about it. But it was always there. I mean, it is not news that Epstein was the closest thing that Donald Trump ever had to a friend. They fell out in about 2004 or 5.
Well, don't forget Elon.
Right.
Well, I guess Epstein was
first. Trump seemed to really like, and I think other than Putin, but they don't speak the same. They don't speak the same language. They don't really hang out. Trump and Epstein, they hang out together. They do the little dance together. The picture you see, they're scoping out children together, they really liked and trusted each other. So, and all of that, you could see it. That's been known for a long time. And yet, so one of the puzzles and one of the challenges that newspapers have, and media institutions have, is they have to report things that everyone has known for 10 years as if we just found them out, but they've suddenly become shocking because the people around Trump came to believe that Trump was going to bring truth to this story, which was a crazy thing always to think, but Trump has now suddenly decided, I'm going to tell people that I have no intention of doing that.
Do you think, and I'm working on the news that I read yesterday, which was the Wall Street Journal report that Trump was in the Epstein files.
Yeah.
And I sat in on a number of podcasts yesterday, and all the podcasters, like Katie Couric and Jim Acosta, said, but we already knew he was in the Epstein files. But the Wall Street Journal story is important because Trump was asked, did the Attorney General tell you were in the Epstein files, and in July, and he said no.
Yeah. So why does this story matter in a way that, like, trying to overthrow the government of the United States by violence didn't matter?
That doesn't matter.
And so I think what is going on is something this. The typical geology of a scandal is any president has a spectrum of people. The people who like him a lot, the people who like him somewhat, the people who thought he was better than the other guy but don't like him that much. And so your work with the president was always worried when something negative happens, that the president will be leading from the center, from his softest supporters. That's typically how that's typically what happened to Joe Biden. I mean, he put together this big coalition in 2020, but the people who were most exposed to the pain of inflation, young people, working class people, those people who felt the inflation of 22 and 23 the most, they drifted away from. He kept the core. He kept the people who really are the center of the Democratic Party, but you lose at the margin. And that's what people thought might happen to Donald Trump after the attempted overthrow in 2021. Yes, he'd keep his famous base, but the people who are sort of the more normal Republicans would say, even though we don't love Biden, this is too much. Mm-hmm. What is going on in the Epstein story is he's actually losing his craziest supporters, not his most. Because in core Trump world, here's how a normal person understands the Epstein story, which is there is this sociopathic person who is engaged in what looks a lot like financial fraud, who also had this monstrous sexual drive, and who involved other very wealthy and powerful people in his sexual crimes, and then did all this sick pattern where they protected him because he protected them.
An extortion racket.
Yeah, it's not the first time in the history of the world that this has happened, but that's the way a normal person understands this, and then they would understand. And Trump is one of those powerful people who was protected and protecting, and probably one of the people who was maybe he wasn't close to the sex crimes exactly, but he was certainly close enough. Okay, that's what I know. But the crazy people think that there is this global center of child predation that Epstein was a part of, but it's much bigger than Epstein, that involved everyone they hated.
Every Democrat,
Nancy Pelosi, everyone they hated. Hillary Clinton, who is definitely devil worshipping. Everyone they hated, and nobody they liked. And in fact, the person they liked most was the hero of the story, who was only pretending to have been Epstein's friend, so he could rip off the mask like the kids at the end of Scooby-Doo and expose this monstrous conspiracy by the liberals. So you think, that's nuts. That's not what was going on here. But that's what a lot of people who backed Trump believed. And they're having to confront that this entire morality opera they created with Trump as the hero is wrong. And Trump is actually one of the important villains, not the hero. And the people with the normals, yeah, you didn't know that? No, we really didn't. We should have known it maybe, but we couldn't accept it. And so Trump is not losing from, in this case, losing from the margin. He's losing from the core. And the margin, at the same time as he's piling tariffs on the margin and taking away Medicaid, so he's doing things that alienate the margin, and he's also shattered the central myth of his core. That's why this is so painful.
Very, very well explained, thank you. And I am struck by the old-fashioned kind of narrative that the Wall Street Journal is spinning. The what did Trump know about those files in May? What did Bondi tell him, and when did he know it? As though the Wall Street Journal were able to reenact Watergate. Yeah. The uncovering of a White House cover-up is going to happen through a newspaper, and it's unbelievably reassuring, like we're back in a world where newspapers rule.
Yes. But what's strange about this is, again, it has been long known that Trump ran a modeling agency, which used underage girls who, among other things, were used to represent liquor companies, which is quite illegal. And that there were complaints by these girls that Trump ran a Miss USA contest and told Howard Stern that he walked into the changing room to gawk at the teenagers while they were undressed. There have been many charges by women of, I think, 24 or more of sexual violence by Trump against them. He was found liable in a court of law for sexual violence against one, which makes all the other complaints, which are already pretty darn credible, even more credible. Some of the people who brought those complaints were underage. And all of this was reported was certainly reported by 2016, and many of these stories date back to the 2010s and even earlier. So it's not a question of what the real scenario. Maybe this is not the story of what did the president know and when did he know it, but what did we know and when did we choose to remember that we knew it?
Well, when were we allowed to remember it? It's been all made not to matter.
Yeah. Well, I think that one of Trump's methods has been to create so many scandals. Again, to use a sort of pop culture analogy, it's like the disease door of Mr. Burns. For those of you who watch The Simpsons know this. So Mr. Burns, he looks really sickly, but he has so many diseases that none of them can get through the door. They all bump into each other. And Trump is sort of the Mr. Burns of scandal, of all these scandals. And so you have, whenever a scandal breaks, you'll have this fascinating dialogue on Twitter where someone say, well, this revelation of the sex crimes is just an attempt to distract from his financial crimes. And these financial crimes are just an attempt to distract from his collaboration with Russia, which is in turn, and so on it goes. You think, well, no, it's just... He's done a lot of things. And he's got an administration this time of much less capable and nimble people.
To put it mildly.
To put it mildly. So last time, he had people around him who knew what he was and tried to protect him from himself. And this time he's surrounded by people who seem genuinely not to know or care what he is, and so they're not as good at protecting him from himself.
So I'm going to put you on the spot. We're not on. It's not being recorded for.
It is being recorded. Everything's recorded. This is not the Dave Chappelle show where we've patted down people with cell phones on their way in. It's recorded.
I will send the tape. Could this bring down the presidency? We're all hoping and praying.
Not to be evasive here, but that's a much less binary question than you might think. There are a lot of presidencies have many forms of power, and so a presidency can be substantially weaker than it was without the formal resignation of power. I mean, it is worth remembering that what happened during Watergate was President Nixon's revelations concerned two of the most terrible years in American economic history since the Great Depression. And one of the questions that it is worth thinking about with Watergate is if the economy in 1973 and 74 had been as strong as it was in 2017 and 2018, would Nixon have found himself as immune as Trump was? And I think that's quite possible. So one of the mistakes Trump is in the first Trump presidency, he mostly kept out of the way of the economy. He did do some dumb things. He did do a trade war in 2018, and it did affect the stock market in the second half of 2018. But he backed away from some of those trade measures, and then COVID made the whole thing move because it shut down trade regardless of what the president did. So that was the virus, not a response to his policies. But this time he started early with the tariffs, and he's going to pay an economic price for that. So he's not creating a situation where people can say, well, I don't care. Maybe he's not a nice man, but I don't care. I'm doing well. Americans are not doing so well. And if he can persist in the tariff policy, they will do worse.
Absolutely. And that's before we get to the concentration camps.
That's before we get to the camps. So to bring this home, because the Atlanta public transportation system hired a new CEO recently, or actually during Biden years, who was a Canadian. And he came down to Atlanta and was on some kind, not the green card, but some kind of work visa to run the Atlanta system. And the visa was expired a few weeks ago, and he applied for a renewal. But because the immigration system has been so crushed, those renewals are much slower. So there's going to be an interval between the time when the old visa expired and the new visa would come into effect. And so he resigned because he didn't want to take the risk that, and he's running, I don't know how big the system is. I assume tens of thousands of employees, hundreds of millions of dollars of assets. He's obviously a well-compensated, distinguished person with a record of success that would bring him to run the transportation on such a major. And he didn't want to end up with a gun up his nose, being hauled off to a detention camp, to be kept there who knows long. So it can happen to Canadians too. There have been reports of Canadians on the receiving end of this. I mean, I've long argued that the United States needed more immigration enforcement. And the first article I wrote for The Atlantic after the Biden election, or after Biden took office in 2021, was that Biden was visibly relaxing border controls, and this was going to be a terrible mistake for which we would pay a terrible price. But it is really worth bearing in mind that in the American system, illegal immigration, while illegal, is not a crime. In the same way that many actions, reckless driving, below a certain level of intensity, it's illegal. It's not a crime. There are consequences for it. You can lose your license. You can be deported from the country, but you're not usually sent to a prison for being an illegal immigrant, just for that. And illegal immigrants also have rights. They have a right to first there has to be a hearing shown to show you actually got the right person. You picked me up thinking I'm, Juan Vargas. I am Juan Vargas, but I'm not the Juan Vargas you want. I'm a different Juan Vargas. I'm a U.S. citizen. I'm here on a green card. You get some showing of that. And then even once detained, you have rights of humane treatment. And all of that is going out the window in ways that seem to be on this spiral of increasing horribleness. And the recent fiscal bill puts an amount of money in the hands of this agency that's going to make it as almost the size of the United States Marine Corps, bigger than all the rest of the law enforcement apparatus the federal government put together, and in the hands of people who are masking their faces and putting on tactical gear in order to round up roofers at the Home Depot.
It's so awful. I think everyone in Canada is wondering, and this is the last thing I'm going to ask you, how long can it go on? We really are wondering, how long can this kind of lawlessness and brutality be endured?
There have been long, dark moments in American history before. And something I think about from time to time is, some of you may know the Civil War anthem, Marching Through Georgia. It's very powerful. It's a music hall song written in the 1860s. And listen to it, I won't try to sing it. But one line, people of human rights. One of the lines of the song was, "Hurrah, hurrah, we bring the Jubilee. Hurrah, hurrah, the flag that makes you free." And as Sherman's army was marching through Georgia in 1864, that flag did indeed make you free. But it is worth remembering that just 10 years before that, if you were in the hold of a slave ship on the high seas and you saw an American flag, that was the flag that meant you were in trouble, that they were not going to stop the slave ship. And if you saw the Union Jack, that was the flag that would make you free. And so America has had these other periods. And I think, and one of the lessons I am taking from this, as I personally think about my own history, and I'm writing a memoir, and I'm trying to think about that, is those of us who came of age intellectually in the 1970s and 1980s had a story that we told ourselves about the United States and about democracies generally, which is things at a certain point were fairly dark and oppressive, but there have been steps toward enlightenment. And it's always 3 steps forward. Sometimes there's a half step back, but it's 3 steps forward. And rights are extended, the ambit of humanity is extended, participation is extended, prosperity is extended, and it's an onward and upward story. And you can date it from whenever you want, 1776, onward and upward and upward and upward. And it's worth thinking that if, however, when you look back at those steps backward that look like blips from the perspective of 1977, if you were there at the time, you didn't know how the story was going to go. Maybe it was not 3 steps forward, 1 step back. Maybe it was 3 steps forward, 1 step back, and that's it. We're back. And so things can go on. So we can't predict. But what we can know, we cannot know the future. We can't make statements about the future. We can make statements about our responsibilities, our duties, our commitments, our beliefs, our principles, and we can act on those. Statements about the world are estimates at best, guesses at worst, complete fantasies at even worse. But statements about your own self, those you can reach into and find, okay, this is who I am, this is what I believe, this is what I will do, this is what I'm bound to do, this is what I will try to do. You can make those statements.
Very, very well said. Thank you.
Why don't more American voters see Trump's personal financial gain during his presidency as corruption? And has influence buying become normalized?
Yeah. I think there's a lot of ways. It's a powerful question. There's a lot of answers. Let me just take one tiny piece of it. Because I think the human mind, just generally, this is true of all of us, has difficulty with problems of scale. And we all know that 1 billion is more than 1 million, or we think we do. But we don't know how much. We don't know how much more it is than 1 million. And so when you hear that Hunter Biden is trading on his father's influence to sell paintings that are worthless for $50,000 each, that sounds pretty bad. Shouldn't do that. And then you hear that Trump is making $500 million from this meme coin. You think that also sounds pretty bad. You shouldn't do that. And it's hard to put, well, the difference between the ne'er-do-well son of the president making a dirty $50,000 and the president himself making a dirty $500 million. We know one is more and bigger, but we don't really, there are people, it's hard to process. And so there's a kind of shrug of, well, everybody does it. And because the American system of government, all democracies have a certain amount of lubrication in the joints. They don't run exactly by the formal rules. And the American democracy runs with a little bit more lubrication than Canadian, Australia, New Zealand, Germany, Britain. I don't know about France and Italy, but so there's always been, and it's not, it doesn't work exactly the way it works in the civic books. And so the idea, and so you can always point to a what about this, what about that, and it's always true. And it's hard for people to wrap their minds around the idea that this is a difference in size that is so dramatic, a difference in essence that is so dramatic. It's so much money. It's so pervasive. It touches so many different people. It touches every aspect of the government. That makes it a different thing from Hunter Biden selling a painting for $50,000 because someone wants to ingratiate himself with the Biden family.
Is Trump truly in control, or is he being steered by figures behind the Project 2025 group?
Well, Mike Murphy, who is a political consultant and who worked actually on some Ontario campaigns, had a line about Trump. He said that teaching Trump, he was talking about the difficulty of coaching Trump to debate in 2016. But teaching Trump to debate is like teaching Charlie Manson to foxtrot. He can execute a few steps for sure, but then he'll put a pencil in your eye because he's Charlie Manson. And so I think one of the things that people are always trying to steer Trump. I think it's one of the things that makes people interested in being around him is because Trump is passive, he doesn't work very hard, he gets to the office late, but he also has this kind of feral understanding of when people are trying to control him, and then he will act out against them. So just when you think you've got him doing what you want him to do, that's when he puts the pencil in your eye. Because the willfulness is the defiance is such an aspect of his personality. And so he often does things that actually, he didn't know he was going to do them 5 minutes before he did them. They don't necessarily have a reason, but they're driven by us to say, no one tells me what to do, not very long, not very consistently.
Reassurance.
As a U.S./Canadian dual citizen living in PEC, what can I do beyond voting to push back against the Trump administration?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Well, you're living in PEC, so you can't do some of the things I would say, which is to take part in small-scale civic actions. I don't mean protests here. I mean, don't evade jury duty when the notice comes. Try to go to the school board meeting. Run for something. Because democracy gets built from the bottom up. And the habits of I often think that the habits of democracy have atrophied somewhat, a victim of busyness and social media and all the other distractions of Americans, you can see, and other countries too, people perceptibly belong less, join less, do less. And reknitting those patterns is part of it. Learning enough about government to understand the difference between the usual improprieties that are just part of the fallen condition of mankind and serious criminality. But the vote matters, being informed matters, using your social media responsibly matters. I think to keep in mind, when Walter Cronkite was talking to people about Vietnam, the Vietnam War, and bringing in people's living rooms, that film, which was recorded on a camera, was probably a week old. You took a scene of fighting in Vietnam, you then drove the film from wherever the fight was to Saigon, you put it on a plane, you flew it to New York, you developed the film in New York, you edited it, you put it on CBS Evening News. Some days have passed. If you have one of these, and everybody does, you have more instantaneous communication power than any of the great broadcasters whose names you remember from history. Use it responsibly. You are a publisher as well as a consumer. It doesn't feel that way, but you are. Be real careful what you share. You know what? Dogs can't play Jenga. That's fake.
We wish they could. It's hilarious to believe they can, but they can't. Probably no harm is done by sharing that video that was engineered to dupe you into sharing it. But there are a lot. Just always be aware, and this is as true on any one side of it. There are things that are designed to push your anger button and engage you, and you need to be really, and especially as AI slop fills your Facebook, you need to be more discerning than ever. Where did this come from? How do I know that it's true? If I'm seeing an exciting video, who made it? How did it come to? How did this video treat every video as an artifact? Who made it? How did it come to exist? What happened a second or a minute before? What happened a second or a minute after? I'm inclined to share it. What am I doing when I share it? What am I furthering? You have to act a little bit like a publisher yourself. And that's something that we can all do. It doesn't make, in any case, any much difference individually, but collectively, it makes a difference. And with what AI is about to dump onto your social accounts, it's going to be more important than ever to be a discerning consumer and discerning distributor of information.
Okay, we're running out of time here, and I don't want this to end. Were you surprised by Canadians' emotional response, boycotting U.S. travel and buying Canadian? And does it strengthen your pride in Canadian identity?
I was surprised by some particular forms of it, but I wasn't surprised. Canadian identity is strong indeed. My absolute favorite story about Canadian history comes from a memoir written by someone who served on the Canadian forces in 1939-45. I read the story in a book by Max Hastings, and I quoted it, and then the man's daughter saw the quote and sent me the whole memoir. And it's amazing. It's an amazing story. But here's the story. So this person, I'll abbreviate. There are a lot of wonderful details which I'm going to have to abbreviate. But this person ended up joining the Canadian Army in September, whatever it was, 1939, and serving all the way through to 1945, rising from being a lieutenant to ending the war as a brigadier. And his service was so distinguished that to honor him on the day, when the day came that the Canadian Army was to take the surrender of the German Army group in the Netherlands, he was given the honor of driving to German lines, picking up the German field marshal, escorting him back to the Canadian lines to execute the instrument of surrender, and then driving him back. This is a very signal distinction. On the drive back, the car was on. It was very quiet. It was him, the driver, the field marshal's translator. It was very quiet. There was obviously a great sense of defeat and shame. The field marshal later committed suicide. And the silence was at length broken by the translator tapped the Canadian brigadier on the shoulder and said, "My field marshal would like to know, what did you do in civilian life? What did you do before the war? Were you perhaps a professional soldier?" And the brigadier realized it was so long ago he could no longer remember his civilian life, the person he had been. And then he realized why the question was being asked, because this field marshal was seeking some comradeship in arms with him. Whatever we saw, we're on opposite sides, we were both soldiers together. And then he thought of all the things he had seen, all the horrible things he had seen, and he thought, I'm not going to give him that comradeship. And he replied, I wasn't a professional soldier. Very, very few Canadians ever were. In civilian life, I sold ice cream. Which, if you read the rest of the book, was true. And he said that's who he was. That he was someone who spent his life. He'd been in the ice cream business before the war. He joined up to do his duty. He'd done it. And he retained the moral sense that I'm not, even though I've been a soldier for 6 years, I'm not a soldier. And I'm going to go back and be a civilian again. So I'm not surprised by the human instinct of every human being to defend what is his or her own. And it may be small, it may be not as glamorous as the big thing that the neighbor has, but it's his own, and he defends it. I'm not surprised by that.
One last question, and then I can perhaps invite the audience to
That's not a short question. I'll do my best. Yes, but. And here's the yes, but. So the United States is a two-party system, and the advantages of the two parties are very deep and very great. But it has had at intervals important third parties. Now, those third parties never win, but they reshape politics. The Free Soilers in the 1850s, the Greenbackers and Silver Parties in the 1870s and 1880s, the Socialists before the First World War, Prohibition and Temperance parties. And the way those kinds of parties make a difference is they find an issue that the two big parties, for their own reasons, don't want to touch. But an issue that is important to large numbers of people who feel estranged by the two parties not touching it. An issue where large numbers of people are prepared to say, for me, this is issue one. So I'm prepared to work with people whom I normally wouldn't agree with. But I want to stop the expansion of slavery into the territories. I want to get us off the gold standard so to relieve the debt of farmers. I believe in socialism. I believe in temperance. So I'm going to work with people who are different from me in every way on this one thing for a limited period of time to change politics. What tends not to work, what never works, in some sense, we're going to build a whole new purpose-built party that covers a range of issues. So if Elon Musk thinks he's going to take his own peculiar ideology, all of his own peculiar beliefs, and find 10 million people who agree with him on the Elon ideology, he's deluding himself. That's not going to happen. And as Andrew Yang found, he took his own very highly specific. Andrew Yang thought the main thing wrong with American politics is Americans didn't appreciate how great Andrew Yang was. And he was just confident there are 10 million people who agreed with him, that this is like a real gap. And it didn't work. But here's how come if Elon Musk says, one of the things that's very important in America is there are a lot of people who believe in insane conspiracy theories, of which Epstein is number one. And if Trump is giving up the insane conspiracy theory territory, I can take it. And I'm not going to try to build a whole new multi-issue party. That won't work. But like the Free Soilers, I can say, this is the play. If you are someone who is mad that Trump is covering up the enormous secret that is the Elon conspiracy, with all its many ramifications, and I would be the new Trump. I would be the new, powerful, wealthy hero who bravely exposes the truth of the global conspiracy you all believe in, and that Trump is now telling you may not be the way you think it is. That could make a difference, because he could rip off. If he rips off the 5 or 8% of the craziest people in America and puts them in their own home, that could be important.
I was just going to ask Mr. Frum, do you think that the events south of the border were sort of creeping authoritarianism? Do you see this as a template for other leaders in other places in the world that might follow it? Or is it a warning to other people in the world to not go that way?
Yeah. I think we have other examples. One of the things that, and I think this is a benefit I get from spending so much time in Canada, like Canadian things, when Americans try to explain Trump, they look backward in time, and they say, where does this come from in our history? And I'm always advising, look sideways in space, as well as backwards in time, to say, what else is going on in the world? That we are seeing the rise of these kinds of authoritarian parties all over the developed world. There's a breakthrough just in Japan. It's not just a European thing. Something is going on in the world. And here, let me point to, I think, 3 things that are driving this politics effort. I'll try to do this as fast as I can. I think there are 3 things that are going on in our modern world that are producing this. The first is the 15 years from 2007 to 2022 saw 3 enormous economic shocks. The Great Recession, the COVID pandemic, and then the inflation after COVID. By contrast, the 25 years before 2007, 1982 to 2007, were a period of relative economic stability across the world. So we went from a period of relative, there were recessions and some inflation, but nothing as dramatic as what happened between 2007, 2022, all over the world. So terrible time of economic shocks. The second thing is this is coinciding with a time of unprecedented global migration. Tens of millions of people on the move from the global south to the global north in ways that are very surprising, that change societies, especially change particular cities, very rapidly. Economic shock, mass migration on an unprecedented scale. And the last thing is that the baby boom generation is moving into old age. So the people who led so many social transformations, the roles of women, social and personal rights, they're now moving into a period where they have more to fear than they have to gain. I'm one of them. And where change is harder to endure and more easy to be afraid of. So you've got so you've got these things, this aging of the population, the arrival of this big cohort of people at the over 65 or over 60 phase, the global shocks and migration. So this is the resource on which the Viktor Orbáns and the anti-immigrant parties in Japan and the reactionary parties in Korea and the alternative to Germany, they all feed on these things. And so I think there's something broadly going on in the world. And add to it the advent of social media, which changes the way information is understood, discredits traditional authority structures about information, makes it harder for people to say this is true and this is not. That's a fourth thing. That's an enabling factor, and I think that's what is the story of our times.
David and Karen, thank you so much for this rich and engaging discussion. This is certainly a volatile time. I'm grateful that the community is paying attention. It's wonderful to have a couple of superstars on stage. I was very excited, and but this is also a very serious topic, and I'm personally grateful for you to encourage all of us to seek the truth. I'm grateful for people like you who report the truth and encouraging us to do our own self-reflection and research and sharing what we know is and believe to be the truth. So I'm very grateful for you encouraging us to be a stronger, more caring community.